It started on an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind of morning when the sun hits the driveway at just the right angle, and you feel at peace with the home you've worked so hard for. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the usual sound of sprinklers ticking across the lawns. But beneath that calm, something was brewing, something I never thought would happen to me on my own property. When I walked outside to grab the mail, I froze. My car, my pride and joy, parked right in front of my house on land I legally owned, was sitting there with a heavy, ugly clamp on the front wheel. Bright yellow, impossible to miss, and screaming violation, as if I had done something criminal. For a moment, I just stood there in disbelief. My brain scrambled through possible explanations. Did I miss a payment? Was there a city ticket I didn't know about? But then the sticker on the windshield confirmed my worst suspicion. This was the doing of the homeowners association. I had heard the horror stories about our HOA before. Neighbors fined for having the wrong color mulch, someone forced to repaint their door because the shade of blue didn't match the approved palette. But a clamp on a car parked on private land. That was new. And that was personal. The notice was blunt. Unauthorized parking. Car will remain immobilized until fees are paid. Contact HOA for resolution. Fees. For parking on my own driveway. Didn't make sense. My name was on the deed. The land under the tires belonged to me. I paced back and forth, feeling the kind of heat in my chest that makes your hands shake. The HOA had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't just annoyed, I was furious. It wasn't about the clamp itself anymore. It was about the principle. The neighborhood president, a woman named Margaret, had a reputation. Everyone knew her. She was the type who patrolled the streets with a clipboard, jotting down every little detail she didn't approve of. Too many garden gnomes. Violation. Trash bins visible for more than 20 minutes. Violation. And now, apparently, cars parked on land you own weren't safe from her reach either. I knew exactly what this was. Intimidation. Display of power. A reminder that she, and by extension the HOA, believed they owned not just the neighborhood but us. As I stood there glaring at the clamp, I couldn't help but notice something else. Across the street, on a simple wooden bench shaded by a tree, someone was sitting. They weren't just passing through, they were watching. From a distance, it was hard to tell who it was. But I knew enough about this neighborhood to understand one thing. People didn't sit on that bench casually. It had always been a silent gathering spot, almost like a stage for gossip. Whoever sat there saw everything. And right now they were watching me discover the clamp. That detail stuck in my mind longer than it should have. It wasn't just the clamp. It wasn't just the HOA. It was the fact that someone was sitting there, witnessing it all, as if they had been waiting for this moment. The anger boiled over into action. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos. Close-ups of the clamp, wide shots of my car in the driveway, the notice on the windshield. If the HOA thought they could bully me quietly, they were wrong. I was going to document everything. The rest of that day was a blur of frustration. I tried calling the HOA office, but of course it was the weekend. No answer, just a voicemail telling me to leave a message. My neighbors glanced curiously as they drove by, slowing down just enough to see the clamp but not enough to get involved. That's the thing about these neighborhoods. Everyone knows the HOA can turn on them at any moment, so they stay silent, hoping it won't be their turn. But it was my turn now. The longer I looked at the clamp, the more symbolic it became. It wasn't just metal on rubber. It was a shackle. A sign that the HOA thought they could control me, even on my own property. And in the corner of my vision, that person on the bench didn't move. They sat there calmly, almost too calmly, as though this was all part of a show they'd seen before. By evening, my anger had shifted into determination. I wasn't just going to get the clamp removed. I was going to make sure this never happened again. But I also knew I had to be smart. Going up against the HOA was like fighting a machine. They had rules, lawyers, and endless ways to twist the system against you. That night I didn't sleep much. My mind replayed the image of the clamp over and over, and with it, the sight of that figure on the bench. Who were they? Why had they been there all day? Were they a neighbor quietly supporting me, or someone connected to the HOA. By the time the sun came up, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to back down. If the HOA wanted a fight, they had picked the wrong person. And as I stepped outside the next morning, the clamp was still there. But so was the person on the bench, sitting, watching, and waiting. This wasn't just about a car anymore. Something bigger was happening. And it was only the beginning. The second day began much like the first, only heavier. My car was still trapped, the clamp biting into the tire like a warning, and the HOA office was still unreachable. But my attention had shifted. The clamp was obvious. The real question was the bench. That person, whoever they were, had been sitting there the entire day before, and now, as the morning sun lit the neighborhood, they were there again. Watching, waiting. The same wooden bench, the same posture. It wasn't casual. Nobody spends that much time just sitting, especially not in our neighborhood, where appearances mattered and idle loitering was frowned upon. No, this was deliberate. I tried to go about my morning routine, but I couldn't. Every time I walked past a window, I saw them. Every time I stepped onto the porch, they were still there. It was unsettling, almost haunting. The clamp had been a violation of my rights, but this silent observer added something else, a layer of mystery that twisted the situation into something more sinister. By mid-morning, I decided to walk over casually, pretending I was taking a stroll. As I drew closer, I finally saw their face clearly. It was an older man, maybe in his 70s, with silver hair and a weathered look that spoke of years of watching the world without speaking much of it. He wasn't a stranger. I had seen him before, but rarely. His name, if I remembered correctly, was Mr. Collins. He lived at the far end of the neighborhood, in one of the oldest houses on the block. What struck me immediately was his calmness. He wasn't staring at me specifically, but at everything, the clamp, the street, the houses. His eyes seemed to carry history, as if he had witnessed the rise and fall of countless neighborhood battles long before mine. I greeted him, but his response was minimal. Just a nod, almost like he had expected me to approach eventually. Then he looked back toward my car and the clamp. That was all. No words, just acknowledgement. And somehow, that was more unnerving than anything he could have said. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Collins knew more than he was letting on. That bench wasn't random. It was a vantage point, a quiet seat of judgment. And his presence there, coinciding exactly with the HOA's clamp, couldn't be a coincidence. By late afternoon, the neighborhood began to stir. People walked their dogs, kids rode bikes, sprinklers hissed to life. And that's when the whispers started. Neighbors slowed down as they passed, eyes flicking between me, the clamp, and the bench. They didn't stop to talk, but their glances spoke volumes. They knew something was happening. They could feel the tension building. And then, just before dusk, I saw Margaret, the HOA president herself, drive slowly past my house in her spotless SUV. She didn't stop, didn't say a word. But she looked. She looked at the clamp, then at me, then at the bench. And her expression wasn't one of confidence. It was irritation, almost fear. That moment told me everything. The clamp was her doing, no doubt. But Mr. Collins' presence clearly bothered her. She didn't like him there watching. She didn't like that someone else was observing this little power play of hers. That night, as I sat on my porch, I noticed something unusual. For the first time all day, Mr. Collins stood up. Slowly, deliberately. He rose from the bench, adjusted his coat, and walked away toward his house at the end of the block. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't intervened. But his silent vigil had lasted nearly 2 full days. And then, just like that, it was over. I was left with a strange feeling, a mix of hope and dread. On one hand, I now had proof that the HOA had no legal authority. On the other, there was something about Mr. Collins' watchful silence that hinted at deeper currents in this neighborhood. Currents I hadn't yet understood. The clamp was still on my car. The HOA was still looming over me. But now I wasn't alone. Someone else had seen it all. Someone who mattered more than I first realized. And as I locked my front door that night, a thought nagged at the back of my mind. What role was Mr. Collins playing in all of this? Was he a silent ally, or was he something else entirely? Either way, I knew this wasn't over. The real fight hadn't even begun. As night fell and the streetlights flickered on, the clamp remained on my car like a scar on the driveway. The HOA's power was still pressing down on me, but the quiet presence of Mr. Collins complicated everything. He hadn't spoken a word, yet somehow his silence was louder than any argument. Margaret had seen him too, and her reaction was telling. She didn't like that he was there. That single look of irritation on her face revealed more than she intended. Something told me Mr. Collins wasn't just another neighbor. His calm watchfulness carried weight, the kind of weight that came from history, from knowing secrets no one else dared to speak about. He wasn't there by accident. He had chosen that bench, chosen that moment, chosen to bear witness. And that raised the question, why? Why had he been watching from the start? Was he silently supporting me, or waiting for me to make the wrong move? Was he the neighborhood's hidden conscience, or its quiet judge? One thing was clear, the battle between me and the HOA had caught his attention, and in this neighborhood, that meant the stakes were higher than I first realized. The clamp was just the opening move. The real game was about to begin. But what do you think? Was Mr. Collins protecting me, warning me, or watching me fail?